Good afternoon, dear audience, and warm welcome, everyone. I am Katalin Lugosi. I'm a neurologist in Bajcsy-Zsilinszky Hospital, and my supervisor is Zsolt Mezei at the Department of Neurology, Semmelweis University. My SMS is Marianne Eng, and we are all especially interested in cognition and cognitive dysfunctions of multiple sclerosis. And therefore, my PhD topic is the cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis, clinical and demographic determinants. In my field, my vision is to give a comprehensive epidemiological insight into cognitive dysfunctions of multiple sclerosis by understanding tendencies and relationships with clinical parameters. And our mission is to assist in planning further researches and selecting the most appropriate therapy in MS. And to achieve these goals, our main topic is the cognitive domains impairment in phenotypes of multiple sclerosis with clinical and demographic determinants. And during this process, we recognized that several definitions are in the literature. So the definitions of cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis has been reported in a very different ways. That's why we decided to create another meta-analysis deciphering wide range of prevalence rates in cognitive impairment of multiple sclerosis, recommendation for clinical practice. And my third topic is registry initiation project, establishment of an early stage MS registry. So about the first project, cognitive domains impairment in phenotypes of multiple sclerosis. What does it mean, cognitive domains? Cognitive domains, there are 5 main cognitive domains: the memory function, executive function, attention, language function, and visuospatial perception. So this is cognition, our way of thinking. And every cognitive domains can be measured by different neuropsychological tests, as you can see here. But we have chosen this specified neuropsychological tests. And what does it mean? Different phenotypes of multiple sclerosis. So multiple sclerosis is a chronic demyelinating neuroinflammatory disease. It has 5 main phenotypes: the clinically isolated syndrome, the relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis, primary and secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, and the additional one is the radiologically isolated syndrome. And we would like to investigate the prevalence of these 5 cognitive domains impairment in these 5 phenotypes of multiple sclerosis by using the above-mentioned chosen neuropsychological tests. And after, we are interested in comparison of prevalence rates across the 5 different phenotypes. So the most interesting question is which domain in which phenotypes is the most and the least damaged. And after all, finally, we define clinical and demographic determinants, and we create regression-based analysis: age, gender, disease duration, education level, and physical state, treatment, and other possible influencing factors. So here you can see our systematic search and the flowchart of our selection. We have at this study 96 eligible articles. And here you can see the very first results in the relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis group. So as it has been written in the article by different clinical studies and authors, that the attention function, the information processing speed function measured by SDMT test, is the most affected cognitive domain. The prevalence rate is 25, and the second most frequently affected domain is the memory function in relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. We found it 20% of the patients. And the third is the language function, 15%. And after the visuospatial function, this is 10% in multiple sclerosis patients. And there is another test in SPART test. It means the delayed recall in SPART. And as we expected earlier, the prevalence rate of delayed recall, it requires working memory. So it is worse prevalence rate than generally in visuospatial function. And one of our first results about the clinical determinants, the EDSS scale, this is a functional scale. It measures the disability in multiple sclerosis patients from 0 to 10 point. And there is a clinical threshold at 3 EDSS. It means below the 3 EDSS, the patient has minimal disability, after moderate disability. And we found that below 3 EDSS scale, patients has, so it has more influence on memory functions than if the threshold is below than 3 EDSS scale, as you can see here. So here is our manuscript status, and our target journal is the German Neurology. So for summary, if we know the most effective cognitive domains and most effective phenotypes in multiple sclerosis, it has a great impact on clinical impact, individual treatment and neurorehabilitation programs, and for the researchers, planning most reliable study design for future studies. And after, if we know the determinants, the clinical and demographic determinants, so what does the degree of cognitive impairment depend on? The clinical impact is highlight the patient at risk, potentially at the early phase of the disease, and the research impact is targeted examinations in other influencing factors. The strengths of our meta-analysis, so to the best of our knowledge, this is the first comprehensive meta-analysis all over the entire world in detailed prevalence rate of cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis, and it helps to better understand the context of cognitive impairment. It's a comparative analysis of different phenotypes and domains in multiple sclerosis, but most of the data are from relapsing remitting type, because this is the most frequent phenotype of multiple sclerosis. And we have greater error or bias potential due to very diverse data. So moving on to the second project, deciphering wide range of prevalence rates in cognitive impairment in MS, the recommendations for clinical practice. So as I mentioned before, the prevalence of overall cognitive impairment in general MS population has been reported to wide range between 40 to 70% in the literature. And our hypothesis is the reason is for this wide range is the difference between neuropsychological tests and the cutoffs, the thresholds used to measure cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis. So the main point is everyone defines cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis differently in the literature. So our aim is to provide a comprehensive overview with the definitions of cognitive impairment in MS and to find a correlation between the prevalence rates and the clinical demographic characteristics. So the final goal is to give recommendation in regard of which test and related cutoffs are the most reliable and most ideal for clinical and researcher based on our previous findings. The systematic search is the same. Here you can see the flowchart of the selection at the second project. We have 147 eligible articles for overall cognitive impairment in general MS population and 125 eligible articles for the different phenotypes. And we are at the data analyzing stage. Outcomes. The prevalence of overall cognitive impairment in general MS population and in the 5 phenotypes by collecting all of the available neuropsychological tests or test batteries and compare the prevalence rate across different used tests and cutoffs. And with comparing the result to clinical and demographic parameters, give recommendations. And just a few words about my third project. Establishment of an early stage MS registry. So the problem is one of the biggest challenges currently associated with research of multiple sclerosis cognition is to find a prognostic marker which can be sensitive to progression of cognitive impairment in the very early phase of the disease. And our aim is to find an easily accessible, inexpensive prognostic marker in progression of cognitive impairment that can be an add in clinical practice. the details. Early MS, it means clinically isolated and within 1 year diagnosed. And we plan to measure different clinical and laboratory parameters, as you can see, demographic parameters, age, gender, cognitive, affective aspects of the disease by different neuropsychological tests. We plan to screen our patients annually. And so we are after a pilot period of this registry initiation project. And now we know how we can collect data and how reliable our findings. So now we are currently working on the questionnaire, our questionnaire. And the final aim is to find a widely usable prognostic marker, as I said earlier. So, summarize aims to understand cognitive domains impairment in multiple sclerosis and how does it correlate clinical and demographic parameters related to the first project. What are the most ideal neuropsychological tests and cutoff value to assess cognitive impairment in multiple sclerosis related to the second project? And what are the prognostic factors in progression of multiple sclerosis with the third project? And why is it important? So why is it important to know and to research and to preserve memory functions? Because every man's memory in his private literature. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, I mean, Kati, it's amazing how many patients you involved, and this is really the first meta-analysis on this topic on your first project.
There is a meta-analysis 20 years ago, so someone at the beginning of the first of 1,000 years, so 20 years ago, yes. There is a meta-analysis.
And what could the reason be why it wasn't, it didn't interest neurologists, this topic, for 20 years? What do you think?
I think newer and newer neuropsychological tests have been realized or have been discovered in this 20 years period. So now we have more available test measures than 20 years ago, and maybe we were waiting for the ideal measurement.
It was overlooked that it's time to do a meta-analysis.
Yes.